Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed Live. We're excited to have you joining us today from wherever you're joining us in from, whether it's on Twitch, Twitter, Learn TV, YouTube, or somewhere else, including our friends at the Microsoft Reactor. We're happy for you to be joining us today, and we have a very exciting show and quite a few guests today, so we're going to get right into it. The topic for today is going to be an Ask the Expert session. So if you have any questions, go ahead and start thinking about them. Go ahead, start turning them in wherever you're streaming from, because we have some serious experts on to help you answer all the questions you have about SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. And I'll also add that this group of folks is serious experts, so they'll also be able to probably help you with just about any other question you have about SQL Server or running SQL Server in Azure. So that's great to know. As I mentioned, this is an Ask the Experts, so we will be taking questions live. So this is a great opportunity to get all those questions that you might have about SQL Server running on Azure Virtual Machines answered. If you want to interact with us on Learn TV, you can go to aka.ms/LearnTV, but we are also looking at your questions coming in from any streaming platform. So if you want to head over to Twitch, or you're using Twitter or whatever, you can just put your question in the chat and we'll be able to see it and display it on the screen. Now, the final thing I wanted to mention is that if you are just starting to learn more about SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines, or your organization is moving towards SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines, we've been doing a series with some of the folks on this call, actually, or on this live stream, called the Azure SQL Virtual Machine Reimagine series. And this is where you can get best practices from the experts, from the folks building the experiences for you to get the most out of SQL Server running in Azure. So that's one to check out for sure. That's aka.ms/Azure SQL VM YouTube. And if you needed any other things to go watch, we've also been doing a mini series on Data Exposed on Thursdays, but you can find all of our pre-recorded episodes at just aka.ms/Data Exposed, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is something, of course, we would love for you to do. And this is our YouTube channel, so if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get notifications when we post new videos, start streaming, and all sorts of other good stuff like that. Okay, you're probably tired of me rambling on about all these things and checking out Azure SQL YouTube, so let's get on to the experts and start bringing some of our wonderful experts up. So what I'm going to do is just start bringing them one by one, starting with Aditya. Aditya, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you kick us off by giving us a little intro about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. I'm super excited to be here and sharing my thoughts around running SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine with all of you folks. So my name is Aditya, and I'm a PM, senior PM in SQL Server Azure Data Group, and mainly concentrating on SQL Server IaaS extension. We'll talk about what it is and how to use it, like in deep in a while. So I do work on it in the control plane aspect of SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines.
Awesome, great. And looks like we already have some fans of Aditya. Someone says, hello, Aditya, how are you?
Hello.
Awesome, great. Well, we're happy to have you here. The next guest I'm going to bring up is David Plus. He's no stranger to this show. David, thanks for joining us. For those who haven't seen you on the show, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I'm David Plus. I'm a senior program manager in Azure Data, just like Aditya. I've been focused on Azure SQL Virtual Machine, storage engine, and related features.
Awesome, great. All right, our next guest, can you guys believe it? We have so many guests today. Our next guest is Pam Lahoud, also not a stranger to the show, Pam.
No, hello everyone.
For those who might not have seen you on the show before, I would tell them to go watch all your episodes because they're awesome. But also, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Pam Lahoud. I'm also a program manager on the Azure Data team. I'm the lead PM for SQL Server running in Azure Virtual Machine.
Wow, awesome. So I think with what we have so far, we're going to be able to answer a lot of questions. And finally, last but not least, certainly not least, we have Rajesh. Rajesh, thanks for joining us. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Anna. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on Data Expose Live. So my name is Rajesh. I work as a program manager in the Azure SQL team, focusing on HADR space for SQL Server and Azure VMs. And happy to be here. Yep.
Great. And folks might recognize Rajesh because Rajesh recently released a really awesome video about Azure Data Studio inline migrations. And I think that feature just went public preview recently. Is that right?
That's right, Anna. You're right.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Cool. Okay, so we have everyone here. We've got some folks saying hello from online. So wherever you're joining in from, hello. Thanks for joining us. Start submitting your questions. It looks like I already have a few questions that have come in. Let me start. Let's see, which one do we want to start with? Let's start with this one that came in from the stream. So this says, how is SQL VM different from a PaaS solution? I'm guessing platform as a service solution like SQL DB. Aditya, this might be a good one for you. You want to take that one?
Yeah, cool, sure. Every one of us are pretty sure about this answer, and that's a very, very good question. So when we are running SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines, essentially everything is in your control. You are taking care of your SLAs. You know how to turn the knobs, which is required for your workload, and everything is taken care by yourselves. On top of it, we do provide few manageability aspects for you. Like if you want to take backups, you can use our tools to do backups better. If you want to do like patching, or if you want to do license management, all of that we kind of give you as an extra addition tool. Think us like as a junior DBA working for you. So that's what we do, and hence we call this as SQL IaaS++. But the actual beauty of Microsoft giving you the SLA, Microsoft providing you all the high availability features, all that comes from PaaS, not from IaaS. So that's pretty much how I can keep it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aditya. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add? Cool. Okay, we will head on to the next question. Let's see. Okay, so this next question says, are HADR options different in Azure Virtual Machines? So I'm guessing they're talking about high availability and disaster recovery here.
Right.
Maybe Rajesh, that would be a good one for you.
Sure, I can take that. Let me quickly share my screen. I think in anticipation of these questions, I have a couple of slides that I want to cover, and I think this was one of the thing that I had it in my slides. So let me quickly share my screen. I hope you all can see my screen. Right.
You were ready for this.
Perfect. Yep. I mean, these are common questions that we have seen in coming in from field or from customers or from our internal partner. So one of the questions that we keep that customers keep asking us is, are the SQL Server's HA and DR technologies, which stands for high availability and disaster recovery, are they different for Azure SQL VM? The one message that we all want to, I mean, the entire team here, we want to pass across to every viewer is, it's no different than on-premises. Yes, there are some Azure nuances, but when you're planning your high availability and disaster technologies in Azure VMs, everything is same. I mean, you still have to think about RPO, you still have to think about RTO. As Aditya was mentioning, if you're running SQL Server on Azure VMs, the onus is on you. You get better control. You get a choice of your operating system, choice of your SQL Server version, but you also get to choose between different options which go across the board from a lower RPO to a higher RPO. So which means the onus is on a customer like you to choose which technology that you want to prefer with. And going about the technologies, these are no different with what you do on premises. So you start with always on availability groups, which is a flagship HADR solution. Then you have your traditional failover cluster instance, which has been around for quite some years now. I think from 2000 to 2005, early in 2005 days. Then you have your tried and tested log shipping, which just works. You set it up, it just works. I mean, these are backup files which are copied, restored, and then it just works forever. And then backup and restore, right? For people who don't want to invest in additional replica or an additional node, you can still rely on your backup and restore. And one thing which I want to touch upon is in Azure only, you also have a fully managed PaaS service called Azure Site Recovery. This is a fully managed platform as a service recovery site. Think of this as one engine which does your site recovery for you. You can set up site recovery between on-premises to Azure, or if you're all up in Azure and you want to set up recovery between one region to another region, you can still do that. And as you can see towards the right-hand side, I've also put in a diagram which tells you on off all the important things that we talk about to customers in terms of for HNDR, it's RPO and RTO. So that's all it all boils down to. And if you go down the list, as you can see, availability group has the lowest RPO. And if you go down the list, you'll see site recovery, which is again disaster recovery, which is understandable that in the event of a disaster, you are okay to take that higher RPO and so on and so forth for all the list. And similarly for RTO, AG provides the highest RTO, FCI comes closer to it. And if you go down the list, you get a higher RTO. And we in the team, we also said, okay, what is the ideal solution that if customers come us, hey, can you give us some prescriptive guidance on which solution that we want to go to? And obviously, there are differences between availability group. There are pros and cons when you compare between availability groups and failover cluster instances. But ideally, both of them are good. I mean, AGs are good for HA and DR. FCAs are primarily good for HA. If you have to do the storage replication on a disaster recovery side, you can still set it up, but primarily they are geared towards HA side of things. And then as you go down the list, you can set it up, let's say for Azure Site Recovery, this is something that you can do for a DR. But our flagship, I mean, the always-on solutions, be it availability group or failover cluster instances, should definitely fit your bill. Back to you, Anna.
Awesome, cool. It's really handy that you had that kind of handy. Then that was really useful. I've actually never seen that kind of view of the higher and lower RTO and RPO and how you think about the different options from there. Let me bring folks back on. We got one question, which I think is going to be perfect for Pam. I think this question is, which virtual machine series should I start with?
That is a great question. It's one of our favorite questions to answer. So the short answer is, if you're not sure what you need, go with the EDS-v4 series. EDS-v4. So E series VMs are part of the memory optimized family. And the DS series happens to have a large local drive, which gives you a lot of space for your temp DB. And it's got good remote throughput and local throughput. It's just really a great, it also has that 1:8 core to memory ratio, which is this kind of the sweet spot for most database workloads. So it's really got everything you need, especially if you're not sure what you need. Like if you're not sure what your IOPS and throughput are, it's a great place to start. So E series, M series is also memory optimized, but the E series is just a little bit more well-rounded, I would say. M series is like super high in memory and lots of cores, but E series we're finding is the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Awesome, cool. David, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. The EDS-v4 too, it's really easy to scale up and down the table. So like you're talking about that consistent mem to core ratio, but also as you're going up and down the table, you're not going to lose a lot of the IO and throughput as you scale. So it works towards your needs from a scalability perspective as well. So you have that really strong IO and throughput capability and the scalability, and you need that, because I mean the whole perspective is I want to be able to scale my workload 9 to 5, and then I'm also want to be ready for those peak spikes at night on the weekends. It could be like an ETL scenario. It could be a data warehousing scenario, or I'm just like preparing for end of week, end of month, end of quarter scenario. So I want to be able to scale to that and then scale back down, but not lose too much of the IO and throughput that I run into a capping condition. And that's why I think that the EDS-v4 is a perfect starting place for that as well. I mean, Pam's right too. The M series is really, really strong for those high memory needs, but I would target the M series when I know that I have to have that memory for that scenario. So absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
Got it. That makes sense. And that's a good one. And I think we've actually done an episode on this exact series. So if you want to learn more about the series, they can check that out. David, I think there's a question kind of related to this topic that came in from Learn TV, and they say, let's see if we can get it up. Nope, that was the one we just did.
Okay.
Here it is. Is there an easy way to find out if a workload is being capped and at what level?
Okay, so let me see if I can. I'm going to kick off because I have one of my VMs. This is a common question. So let me kick off one of my workloads to refresh a scenario. The answer to the question is you have to. Is there an easy way to find out if a workload's being capped at what level? Okay, so you are going to look at Azure Monitor and Metrics really to answer this question. And hold on one second. I have a dashboard actually. I have 2 dashboards actually for this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Viewers are lucky today.
Yeah, this question comes in a lot. So here's what I did. And if you share my screen, okay. So I have 2 dashboards I'm going to show you. So one is all the key perfmon counters that we typically look at from either it's on-prem or on an Azure Virtual Machine. But to answer the question on am I being capped, really what we want to look at is the uncached bandwidth and IOPS scenario. So if it hits 100%, you're being capped. If we start getting close to that 100% mark, we know we're being capped. And we want to look at the documentation. We mentioned the EDS V4, we mentioned the M series. If you actually go to the documentation, which I actually have, hold on, in another screen. Yes, here we go. So this is an example. So this is the max uncached disk IOP and throughput. So when I talk about scaling up and down on the table, I'm talking about this, the ability to resize your virtual machine and not lose a lot of the performance. This is the IOPS, and this is the throughput that we're referring to. That is measurable using Azure Monitor and Azure Metrics. This is at the VM level, and this is at the disk level. So I think that workload that I just kicked off is probably baked pretty well. So if I go back and go to my other dashboard that I have, you can see here, okay. All right. So I've been kind of like kicking this on and off because I kind of been this question comes up so often. I like to be able to talk about it. So if you see here, this is my cached bandwidth. This is my uncached bandwidth. You can see that at one point they both hit 100%, right? But my disk never went above, what is that, 66%? So I know that for this workload, I know that I'm VM constrained. My disk can handle what I'm throwing at it. So the P30s that I have for this machine, it's not going above 66% at even its worst moment. However, my VM is capped at both the uncached workload and at the cache. So how would I solve for this? I would resize the VM.
Got it. Okay. No, this has been really useful because not only can I see kind of what to look out for, but also you can see like, okay, well, if this is what you're being, throttled on, then you have to up the size for that.
Right. The direct answer to the question is Azure Monitor and Metrics. But what I want folks to realize is that you're not looking at your typical memory or CPU scenario. You can do that through Azure Monitor and Metrics. You can also get some of the network data as well. But to me, from a VM perspective, the most crucial aspect is getting your IOPS and throughput situation at the VM scope. I'm not saying that not to look at the perfmon data, to kind of like make sure that you're in range of what your benchmarks are, especially if you migrated a workload. But the only way to see if you're being capped from the VM, the host perspective, is to look at Azure Monitor and Metrics, and specifically I didn't know we stopped sharing.
We can put it back up.
Yeah. So in particular, these counters here. And I think, you can see it. Those counters there for your VM and your disk level.
Got it. Cool. This has been, this is really useful. Hopefully that answered the person's question. Let's see what else we've got. I know we've got some questions on YouTube and comments on YouTube. Someone said, okay, thanks. I'm not sure which question that was for. I'm sorry. And then someone said, these deep dives are great as always. But now we have 3 questions coming from YouTube. Let's start with this first one. This one comes from Mani RV. With containerization, will be handy for future data modernization like microservices. Will SQL VM... Oh, okay, so I'm understanding. They're saying with containerization... Sorry, I'm hearing someone has a siren. Hope everything's okay in your neighborhood. I shouldn't laugh, but here I am. But basically, I think what Mani you're asking is with containerization, is SQL IaaS like going away or becoming less of a priority?
So I will take that question. So everything has its own the world, right? So containerization has its own use cases. SQL VM has its own use cases. Like everything has its own use cases. So I don't think one will replace other, because there will be still place for those workloads where you want to do, let's say, like 100,000 transactions per second or 200,000 transactions per second and 4 Gbps throughput. Such type of workloads will generally go into VM. Any other is a ground up. You need to reinvent from the ground up. That is one. The second is like take a migration scenario. Let's say you are working on a very famous bank, and now you want to shift your workload from on-prem to cloud. You might not really start thinking about, hey, can I containerize it? Yeah, for sure. Your applications and application stack would be for sure a great thing to start with. But for the persistent systems like databases, yeah, you still can do containerization. I'm not saying no, but the first place to start is where you take a virtual machine, put your workload, see how your cloud is working on it, and then decide for the next steps. So I do think there is a place for each and every technology, no matter how far you go. That's what I think.
Yeah. I also want to add one point, which is, I think, adding on to what Aditya was mentioning. We also support SQL Server on containers, and we have seen some customers who have run into that, and that's the world that you should go, right? For all the modern apps, for born in the cloud apps, they start with containers, but they also run for the persistent SQL data. For the persistent data storage, containers are stateless. They go down, they come back. But we have seen use cases, we have also seen firsthand with customers where they said, okay, we love SQL, we want SQL on containers, great, SQL runs on containers. And even in stateless, they attach a persistent storage for those containers. So that way, if the container goes down and the container comes back, and then you have a SQL that's running in it, it still goes to the same persistent storage. You can still retrieve the data that was stored in the container before it was running. So that way, the scalability and everything is handled. And then you have the Kubernetes, which does the orchestration for all the containers. And these are cases where we have seen with some niche customers who have used who pretty much love SQL on-prem. They said, we love SQL. We also want it to run on containers. And because we love the born in the cloud, the new data modernization effort that's going on. And they've also leveraged running SQL on containers. So that's one point that I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I think I'll just tack on to that because why not? But what I would say is, as someone who gets to see a lot of all the different flavors of Azure SQL and SQL Server, we're really focused on bringing SQL Server anywhere that you are for any scenario that you have. And so each of these use cases or each of these deployment options is going to depend on your scenario. And sometimes you could say maybe that makes that more confusing, but I think really the benefit here is giving you the flexibility of how you want, your SQL to be, also with kind of the other benefits of already knowing a lot about SQL and T-SQL and all that good stuff. Cool. Hopefully that helped. That was a great question, Mani. So thank you. There is a question kind of follow up to this from AK. And AK says, we have Azure SQL DB. There's also Azure SQL Managed Instance that covers almost all our compatibility issues. So is SQL Server in an Azure VM only for very old versions of SQL, or are there other business cases?
Yeah, so it falls down to the same answer mostly, right? So, but that's a very good way of thinking also, right? If I have an old version of SQL, the best. Is there a place to go? Yes, VM is a place to go, but that's not the only case where you would go for a VM data set, right? So now think of a scenario where you have more than 32 terabytes or like 64 terabytes of data. You have to handle huge amounts of data. Like, where do you want to go? Like, the VM is the place to start with, and then slowly you go on to PaaS solutions or wherever solutions. So the answer is yes and no. As in, yes, if you have older versions, you have to go for VM, SQL VM as a solution. But the reason no is because there are other scenarios too, other business cases too, as I just mentioned, where you can use SQL VM as your first class solution. So that's pretty much it. And I do wish you do not stay on older versions of SQL.
Can you, Anna, do you mind putting the question back up for a second?
Yeah,
I just
sure.
want to take. Okay. So another angle to this too. So keep in mind that with SQL DB managed instance and SQL Server, even SQL Server 2019, we support 100 compatibility level all the way to 150. So I agree with what Aditya says. It does depend, but if you have a scenario where you're bound to, I think the key word is compatibility here. Is if you have a scenario where you're bound to a particular compatibility level, whether it's just what your vendor supports, or you need that optimizer consistent experience, you've calibrated to that, and that's the scenario that you're running around. Then we offer that capability for any of those scenarios for SQL DB managed instance as well as SQL Server. Think that on a virtual machine. I think that when you're going to a virtual machine, it's going to come down to give you an example. I have to have my application installed on the local machine, and I have to use local folders, or I need system root access. There's things that I have to do on the VM for my app to work. Those are the kind of scenarios that is going to sort of force the VM discussion. If I need like cross database joins, I still need access to the agent jobs in scenarios like that. Managed instance can cover that. So we have all three. The born in the cloud scenario, I'm going to lean towards Azure SQL Database first.
No, true.
Right.
Yeah, I think.
But go ahead, Rashish.
No, go finish your thought, David.
No, I was just going to say that probably the key scenario, and I don't miss it, is the compatibility level. And what I will strongly recommend is get to the latest compatibility level that you possibly can, because there's a lot of optimizations that are done targeted at the compatibility level. And go ahead, Rajesh.
Yeah, I just want to clarify one. SQL on Azure VMs is only for very old version, but the way that, as you rightly pointed out, right, the perspective that customers come in was they want control on what version of SQL they want to choose with. They might have an ISV app that's certified for, let's say, we have seen SQL customers spinning up SQL 2019 versions. They say, hey, our app is certified only for 2017 and 2019, so you have to pick your specific version of SQL. So you get all that control in an IaaS scenario. And obviously, we definitely want customers to, if you're getting used to that Azure world, we definitely want you to get used to the PaaS side of things as well. So that way you can focus less on infrastructure and more on your business case. So that's one of the scenarios that we've also seen. And the other scenario, is what David was quickly touching upon, is we have seen customers where they come in with a requirement that, hey, in addition to my SQL Server, I also need a third-party app which has to run side by side on the same machine, like as you said, right, the local machine, which is where we say, hey, I need that control where I need the host OS, guest OS access, because I need to install a couple of things, I need to modify certain settings, which is not possible in a PaaS side of scenarios. And it's always a trade-off, right? You get higher control in IaaS, but as you go down to the PaaS, you get lower control on OS, but then you manage up just the SQL and other things. All the other things are right off the shelf for you. So those are the different points. Various business cases, use cases could be different. As Anna was mentioning, right? We have SQL that suits any of your needs. You come in with infrastructure as a whole, where you want to manage the whole VM, you want to do the instance, or you want to just the database. We have everything for you.
Yeah, that you're bringing there's another angle that you just kind of reminded me of, is it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's a little column A, a little column B. Like I don't think I've ever streamed a movie or streamed music and then stopped and go, wait a second, is this running on a VM or is this on a platform as a service scenario? It could be from a software as a service perspective. It could be any of that. It could be all of that. In fact, it could change from Monday to Wednesday, and as long as I keep that same experience, the customer does. We're just trying to consume from a software as a service perspective. What's happening behind that layer? That's where the DBAs and developers are coming in. Where am I going to get the best value, best capability from, whether it be platform as a service or whether it be a virtual machine?
Yeah, follow up to that question, AK, is I also asked like what about if I have Hyperscale is there, right? Can I go and use Hyperscale if I have more than 64 terabytes of data? Yes, for sure. Hyperscale is a great solution for larger databases, but the point boils down to what Rajesh is mentioning about how you choose PaaS versus how you choose IaaS. So you want more control, you have more data to play with. Yes, choose VM. No, I want to give the control to Microsoft. Go choose Hyperscale. So yeah, as Anna is mentioning, like we are giving all the options such that you can choose what is right for you.
Mm.
Yeah, and we are seeing a lot of customers, like it's not okay, I picked IaaS today and now I'm on IaaS for life. Like we do see a lot of customers, and I've seen this pattern a lot, where you make your initial migration into IaaS, then you start to get used to the cloud, and maybe you move some workloads that can move to PaaS after that. So it's all very fluid, and maybe you move to PaaS, and then for whatever reason need more control. We're going to make it as easy as we can for you to go based on what you need, just like you could switch between service tiers in PaaS services. That was a great question. Thanks so much, AK. Hopefully that discussion was useful to everyone. This next question, I personally am not sure about the answer to this, but I'm going to pop it up here and let's see what folks think. This one came from Lakshmi, and they say, for Azure SQL work, what is the preferred best processor? Is it Intel or any other in general?
I don't think that there's necessarily a preferred. We do make it clear which processors are AMD. We have that in the naming convention. When we document the virtual machines, we'll make it clear the type of processor, like if they say Cascade Lake or something like that. But I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a preferred. We try to make it clear what the underlying processor architecture is. But Rajesh, Aditya, what do y'all think? You agree with it?
I agree. I agree with you, David. Like there is ultimately it's SQL Server as an application sitting on an operating system working for you. It doesn't matter if it is AMD or Intel or any other processor. But rather than concentrating on processor, I would choose to ask the question, which series I really need to go, where Pam actually answered the question saying EDS V4 is the series to go, because I would rather concentrate on what throughput I'm getting, what is the amount of IOPS I really need to get, is the memory core ratio is good. Those are the questions you need to answer for running your SQL Server better on virtual machines.
Anna, do you mind if I share my screen real quick?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to go back to the documentation.
Can you make this a little bigger? Sorry.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is all I'm kind of highlight is that you'll see that this is in our documentation, and for the naming convention there is a rhyme and reason around this. So you'll see if you see A in the name, it's an AMD based architecture. But we don't have, I wouldn't say that there's a preferred one or the other. We just try to expose a little bit about what's going on here.
I just want to add one last point to that. So we have seen certain customers who come and say, hey, that was a great question. I mean, I'm also the intent, I'm trying to figure out the intent behind that question as some customers who come in would say, hey, I have this, as David was pointing out, we exactly publish what's the series of processors we use. So that way you can go and look it up, you know the clock speed that it comes with, right? So there are customers who come in, we say, hey, we have an on-prem 4-core. Is an on-prem 4-core equivalent to an Azure 4-core? I mean, who gets somebody who wants to double click on that and get into that CPU clock speed kind of details. I mean, we have benchmarks that shows you like you can do that normalized CPU clock speed on-prem and then convert it into Azure side. If you look up the Azure Migrate, which is a good way of discovery, and what it does is it does a discovery, and then when it does an assessment, it gives you that benchmarked recommendation, like, hey, on the Azure side, depending on your clock speed, depending on your existing hardware, we think that 100% of your on-prem will match to, let's say, E series. You might just need, let's say you have 4 cores there, you might just need 2 cores. So all of that optimization, all of that thinking has already gone into Azure Migrate. In fact, for the SQL Server SKU recommendation, which is again one of the console app, the same IP that has been used in Azure Migrate, we have also created a console app for you. Even that does the same thing, where it does a benchmarking of, we look at your current clock speed, we normalize it against the benchmarked values, we compare Azure CPUs against the benchmarked values, and then we give you exact match. So that way, you're not landing into surprises where, let's say, you have a 4-core CPU that's probably a decade old. That just translates to probably 1 or 2 core on the Azure side if you pick up the E series, right? Let's say if you pick up F series, which is compute intensive, you just need 1. But I mean, the point that we are trying to make is we do definitely consider that factor when we give you recommendations on how many cores you need when you do a matching between on-prem to Azure side. And this happens in Azure Migrate. It also happens in the console SKU recommendation app. I think David has I think he might have demoed it in the past, where we have done that SKU recommendation, which gives you exactly how many cores you need on the Azure side of things. So that way you can get into those nitty-gritty details of how fast my CPU is, what's the best way, what number of cores do I need on the Azure side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. That's a very thorough answer from everyone, so I'm sure our viewers really appreciate it. John Askew has said deep SQL dive. So yeah, that's what we're here for. So keep your questions coming. We still have some time to answer any questions you might have. Now I'm going to put up this next question, and this person actually said they didn't have the question anymore, but I still think it's an interesting kind of topic to talk about. This Master JX9 says, I am learning Azure and SQL right now. I'm a beginner. I currently use SQL Lite with a Linux Ubuntu VM. Is SQL with Azure, does it have better features than using SQL Lite? So I think if one of you all could comment on kind of the differences between SQL Lite and SQL Server at kind of a high level, and then maybe how it differs running on a VM.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm quite sure what the SQL Lite.
I'm waiting
To
for
be
you.
honest, I've never used SQL Lite, so I'm just trying to.
I haven't used SQL Lite either.
Oh, okay. Well, I can take that one then.
Okay.
So SQL Lite is great for learning like the general stuff around SQL. I think for myself in university, we use SQL Lite a lot when we're working with Python. I think a big reason for that is just it's very easy to get your hands on. It's not like a big install or anything like that. But SQL Lite is not for any sort of production workflows, and so it's not going to have the kind of rich T-SQL language or performance or availability or scale that you're going to get with SQL Server in general. And same for SQL Lite on a Linux VM. I think you're going to get a lot different experience using SQL Server on an Azure Virtual Machine. And I think a big reason for that is just kind of the enterprise quality that comes behind SQL Server. You're going to get a lot more functionality, a lot more security for sure. So if you're just tooling around and learning, I think SQL Lite is a great way to get started with that SQL-esque, relational-esque kind of language. But I think ultimately, like, you're going to want to move towards learning a more enterprise grade service. And, you know, we're not biased at all, but SQL Server would be a great place to invest your learning. So
not only that, but SQL VM comes in Windows and Linux. So if you want to stick with your Ubuntu Linux VM, you can run SQL Server on that as well. So
yeah,
that's not a barrier of entry to SQL Server.
And I'm not sure on the exact specifics of what the backend for SQL Lite is. It's been a while, but I'm not sure if it's even like a server. Like I'm just not sure exactly what it is. So I would just maybe double click and check. It might be completely different from what you think from SQL, traditional SQL
I use
Server.
the same SQL Lite. I used same SQL Lite in my college, like recently, and the same experience. So I'm a veteran in SQL Server, and I started using SQL Lite. Yeah, it's great tool for educational purposes. But when you see indexes, when you want to understand the query performance, lot in deeper, and you are really seriously dealing with hundreds of transactions per second, uh, an enterprise grade relational databases would really make sense. And yeah, hey, as Anna said, we do prefer SQL Server.
Awesome.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell just by the audience, you know, we're going to prefer SQL Server, but I do think it's a better fit. And just to kind of go along with that, some of the comments, again, I'm not validating these comments. I would have to look this up. But Joey's Byte saying that SQL Lite is file-based and it's more for embedding, less of a server. And he also says that only one app can access the database at any given time. So again, I think SQL Lite is just, whether or not that's true or not, I think it's more for your simplistic and learning scenarios. But yeah, it is pretty cool. So you can use SQL Server on Linux. We support all OS versions pretty much. Even if you're using like Red Hat, it doesn't have to be an Ubuntu VM. So hopefully that's helpful. Great conversation. We did have one question moving right along from Learn TV come in. Let's see what it is. It says, what about the performance? Are there performance limits on Azure SQL DB, Azure SQL MI compared to SQL on a VM?
I can answer the managed instance angle. I haven't looked at the Azure SQL Database scenarios in a while, but actually, if you go back to the slide that I had, or I'm sorry, what I was sharing earlier. So like, so wait, am I not zoomed in well? Let me see. Does that help?
Yes.
So here again, this is the uncached IOPS and throughput, and as I mentioned, that's like really important to key on. And you're going to see this in the documentation for our virtual machine. We also have, and what I'd recommend is looking up the resource limits for like, let's say Azure SQL Database or managed instance. And I actually have, hold on one second. I generally have this handy. Okay, so I'm pulling up the resource limits for virtual machine. For actually, this is for managed instance, and just look at the service tier characteristics, and they're listing the number of memory, max amount of memory. But the key thing that I would focus on is the data and log IOPS, and they're actually telling you what the limitations are per file, and then especially the log write throughput limit, which is what, from my experience, has been one of those kind of scenarios that'll push you one way or the other, whether you go to a virtual machine or whether you target managed instance. I target managed instance first, just to get the platform as a service experience, and it's really, really strong. If you're born to the cloud, I'd say start with Azure SQL Database and look at the service tier characteristics there. But this is what I would target for that comparison between managed instance and a virtual machine. And it's right there in the documentation. I mean, we do document and make that public.
Yeah, but of course, in order to ensure that you get good performance with your app, you have to actually measure what your app needs.
Absolutely.
That's why it's important to really have an understanding. If you have an existing app that you're going to migrate, to have an understanding. I'm sure you guys talked about this while I was gone, but
no, actually, I don't think we did. Pam, go ahead. No, go ahead. I don't think that question came up.
So yeah, it's just really important for you to monitor your existing application for a long period of time, like making sure that you hit all of the peaks and valleys of your performance, kind of understanding what your average load is over time, understanding what your peaks are, what your busy times are, and monitoring at all those different times. And it's super simple. You can use Performance Monitor built into Windows, or what's the tool for Linux? Do you remember, David, what the name of the?
Oh, geez.
There's a similar tool for Linux that will allow you to monitor perf, and you just want to get those simple counters, how much IOPS your application is generating, how much throughput it needs, and all of that, and making sure that when you choose a service in Azure, that you choose one that has enough performance to meet your needs. And so right now, VM, I think, has higher I/O and throughput limits than MI does. But MI is making some changes to track to higher I/O and throughput as well, as we are for VM. So we're always trying to bump that limit up.
IO stat.
IOStat, thank you. That's the Linux tool.
Yeah, just want to add one part on the performance thing. I mean, with the managed instance, as was David was touching upon, he touched on a key message there, which is we definitely want customers to get into that PaaS side of things because that's where you take off the management overhead. But you also have to understand that when we guarantee, offer a PaaS, which is a platform as a service solution, we have to maintain certain SLAs in terms of availability, performance, and scalability. And that's where we get into those limits of one key thing that David was touching upon, which is a crucial factor, is the log throughput, right? Depending on what kind of an application it is, it's a singleton, or if it does batch kind of writes, you might see that hitting that limit, and you might say, "Hey, this is not what I'm seeing on-prem. My application does much more than this." But in the PaaS world, we kind of get to those limits, and as managed instance, as you've seen in the last 3 years, we have evolved. The platform has evolved, and those limits will start getting higher and higher over time with greater innovations coming in. But if you look at a planet scale of what Azure is trying to do with the platform as a service and with the SLAs that we have to adhere to, those come in with the limits. And if those limits are acceptable to the application, that's the best fit because you take the management overhead completely away from you. But if not, then you get into the SQL Server on Azure VMs, wherein you get the total control. You can pull in as many disks as you want up to the VM size. You can scale up to the biggest VM that's available on Azure. You don't have to think about the log write throughput limits. Obviously, with the bigger VM and with the bigger disk, you get all of that extra legroom that you need, which you said, hey, for my tier 1 stringent IO-intensive application, you might say, hey, SQL VM is the best fit for now. That's well and good. And then once you get there, which Anna was also touching upon, is you're not stuck there forever, right? As the platform as a service evolves, you can quickly migrate from the IaaS to PaaS world and then take the management overhead away from you. So that way, that's the kind of journey that we have seen from typically where customers taken is they land in IaaS, which is what they need. And then as the platform as a service is evolving, they move to PaaS, which is where the overall management overhead is be taken out of your way.
Right. Yeah, and I would say that from to add on to that, the heavy data warehousing and reporting scenarios, especially, I would say, take that in combination with your OLTP, like a mixed workload. That really tends to push you today to virtual machine the way Rajesh was talking about. But and I think you're kind of making that point about the software as a service layer, right? So you move your application experience. It's what the user sees, but behind the scenes, you're continuing to evolve that application scenario, and generally trying to get to a lower total cost of ownership type of situation, or you're providing new feature capabilities, and your app is always evolving.
Yep, that's true. That's totally right.
Yeah, definitely all great points. Okay, let's take a look at the questions. We got a few more that have come in. There's a few that we've been getting on the SQL IaaS extension. Here's one. Let's see. Here's one. It says how SQL IaaS extension makes manageability easy. Didier or Pam, would this be one for one of you?
Okay, I'll take a first hit and Pam, please add. Okay, so SQL IaaS extension is the add-on that you get if you are running SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. So when I say add-on, what exactly I mean is if you like today, let's say today you have your on-prem VM or a server, and you have many manageability tasks. Like you want to patch, you want to do backups and all that. And there is a way that you can do in Azure. In Azure, you might need to make sure that you are really understanding few quirks when you are expanding the storage. There is a way that you can back up your databases directly to a container that you have in Azure Blob Storage, all that. So to make all that easy for a normal DBA to understand the Azure world and make sure that he's adapting to this world, what we did is we tried to create a extension which will sit on the Azure Virtual Machine, and it will try to do all those manageability tasks for you. And again, the configuration is on your is with you. You have to configure everything, but we take your configurations and we do that automation on our side. I can show a quick demo if that makes sense, Anna.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Let me share my screen and let me know when you guys see it.
Yep.
See it.
Okay, awesome. So, I will tell you what else happens with SQL as extension, right? So, if you this is Azure portal to start with, but when you have so many SQL servers, let's say you are a multi-billion-dollar company with so many SQL servers out there. You have SQL DB, you have SQL MI. Sorry, you have SQL DB, you have SQL MI, you have SQL VMs. Now you want to understand, hey, where are my SQL virtual machines? So we give you a great discoverability feature when you come and click on SQL virtual machines, and you can see all your SQL virtual machines, their versions and everything are listed here. Once you go here and let's say once you register your SQL Server to an IaaS agent extension, let me take 1 minute to understand, let you know, guys, what is registering to SQL IaaS extension, right? So the way you can, let's say you have a SQL Server on your virtual machine and your CEIP service, which comes by default, is running on. We kind of send you an email saying that, hey, we are going to get you registered with SQL IaaS extension. If not, you want to install on your own for all the VMs in your subscription. The easiest way of doing that is go to SQL Virtual Machines Blade and click on automatic SQL Server VM registration. Check whatever subscription that you are in and say register. We'll take care of the registration from there on. So we will go, we'll look at the VM. If SQL Server is present, we do put SQL IaaS agent extension in it. When you have SQL IaaS agent extension in it, it will be by default in lightweight mode. So what is a lightweight mode? Lightweight mode is nothing but we don't really do all the activities. The only manageability feature that you would get is the license management. You can go from pay as you go to AHub to DR, all types of different licenses that you have in SQL Server running on Azure Virtual Machines. And one other point that you can do is this discoverability. So that's the lightweight. Now, from lightweight to full mode, if you migrate from lightweight to full mode, it's pretty easy task to go from lightweight to full mode. I will also show you that, if that makes sense. Give me a moment.
And Aditya, from a software as a service perspective, this is continuing to evolve. You're continuing to add capabilities.
Yes. Correct. So if you see that going from lightweight to full mode is nothing but just going here, overview, and clicking on this and say upgrade. It doesn't take any downtime. It won't restart your SQL Server. Nothing happens. You just say click on that balloon and just say upgrade. We'll make it to full mode. Now let's say I got into full mode, and what happens then from then? So it is, you would see this blade, which is only there for SQL virtual machines. And here you have all the features that I'm talking about. One, you can see, hey, what are my drives and how are they actually spanned? I can know all the health of it. And I also can change my licenses from pay as you go to Azure Hybrid Benefit to HDR, as I mentioned. Also, this is one thing that I really love, and we are really working on making it more better for you folks. That is, extend the data drive. When you say extend data drive, you can directly extend your data drive from here, and we give you suggestions saying, hey, what are you trying to do? You have a better option of doing this, or if you do this, you might or might not get what you are anticipating to do. Like, as in, let's say you are adding 10 disks. What happens if you add 10 disks? Like, is that VM capable of handling that amount of throughput and IOPS? Those kind of quicks and messages we kind of display to you such that you take your decision wisely. That's one thing that we do. and we do patching, automated patching. So this patching today consists of all the security updates that you might need for your SQL Server. Whenever we release an update, it would get that, and if you have a schedule, it will go automatically patch your virtual machine, SQL Server virtual machine. It will take the backups too. Like this backups is like you can directly back up to your storage account, where you have it is again in a blob store of cloud. So you can directly store your databases backup over there. So where all these features essentially provide you a greater manageability. We are coming up with some more features, like more exciting features, such that you folks can take the advantage of all this manageability stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Aditya. And it was also cool. I'm glad we got to throw in some views of what that SQL virtual machine kind of blades actually look like. I think we have time for a few more questions. This next question that came in, I'm not sure, maybe Rajesh, this would be a good one for you. They say, do you need an Azure load balancer when you create an AG listener or a SQL FCI? So maybe you could explain that a little bit, if that's something that you know about.
Sure, yeah. That's something that we hear a lot in the HADR space, in the high availability and disaster recovery. So if I step back, I mean, one of the primary reasons why we have to need a load balancer in the Azure world is there's something called as an address resolution protocol, which in the networking world, all it does is it translates your IP, the logical IP of a VM, into a physical MAC address of the VM, right? I mean, that's what it does. But in the software-defined networking world, where everything is virtual, you have a virtual network, you have VMs. This is not something that behind the scenes we do have some physical redundancy, but all you get is a virtual network, and that's how you go about it. And this is something that that doesn't work in public cloud. It doesn't work in Azure. It doesn't work in any other complete public clouds. And with those scenarios and with that restriction that has put the public cloud that puts on us, and if you put VMs in a single subnet, if you think about the AG listener or the SQL FCA, end of the day, all that it needs, it's a DNS name. And for a DNS name to come online, you need an IP address. And the notion with a high availability or a disaster recovery is you have a bunch of VMs, and then at any point in time, if one of the VM goes, the other VM comes online, which essentially means the IP will have to move from node 1 to node 2, or a replica 1 to a replica 2, and then the DNS name comes online, and then the connectivity works. App says, hey, I'm all good talking to the database. And that's all happens behind the scenes. And for all of this to work within a single subnet, the only way that you could achieve this is through a load balancer. I mean, just be really honest, it doesn't do any load balancing, but all that the capability that it provides is it gives a mechanism for you, because you have a property where you, on the load balancing rule, you set a property called floating IP, which in the on-prem world is very easy to achieve with the ARP, but in the public cloud, within a single subnet, the only way to get that working is through load balancer. So load balancing does that floating IP work for you. So think of this as a bunch of replicas that are within your single subnet, and then when one of the VM goes down, the Windows cluster knows that the IP is on the other node. It sends back the probe, and then the probe succeeds, which lets you know that the IP resource comes online, which forces the network name to come online, which means the SQL Server connectivity just works as is. So to answer, yes, you need a load balancer if you're dealing with a scenario where all the VMs are in a single subnet. That's the only way wherein that's the only mechanism to get a floating IP work for us.
Okay, got it. That makes sense, and it seems like these are actually pretty important. So maybe I need to go do some learning about them as well. Okay, our last question. I think Rajesh, this would also be a good one for you. I saw it a little bit earlier, but I think this person was just asking about the AG replica VM or FCI node VMs in both an availability set and an availability zone. Is that something you can help with?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we have seen this question come up with from customers as well. Like when you go into the portal and try to create a virtual machine, like a compute virtual machine, you have an availability options. I mean, the 3 availability options that you get is an availability set, availability zone, or virtual machine scale sets, which is again for those stateless VMs if you want to manage at scale. So let's talk about these 2 options, which is availability set and zone. Availability sets has been around with Azure right from day one. think of this as we place your VMs in a single data center. We make sure that these VMs are in a separate fault domain. What do you mean by fault domain is like a bunch of servers, all of them sharing the same top of rack switch, which means if the top of rack switch goes down, every VM in that rack would go down. And we make sure that we actually place your VMs in multiple fault domains. And we also have something called as update domains, which means when we try to update, we make sure that we update it one at a time rather than updating all of them at the same one. So that way, you don't have a downtime wherein your VM goes down and still and affects your availability. So end of the day, you can only choose between an availability set or an availability zone. You pick one of them, one or the other. Availability set is all within the data center, has a lower SLA, which still gives 99.95. But if you want to have, let's say, I want to have geographically dispersed data centers all within the same region, within less than 100 miles, then you get into an availability zone scenario where you have disparate data centers. Each VM will be placed in a different data center. So it could handle scenarios. Let's say you have power outage in one particular region of the city. You still have your other two zones up and running, which means your availability is not impacted. So essentially, you pick either a zone or a set.
Awesome, cool. That was a lot. I think maybe we'll end on that one, and we will provide some resources for you all. So if you want to go learn more about SQL Server running in Azure Virtual Machine, or you have more questions, we have a lot of resources for you to go learn more. You can always comment on our video or any of our VM videos, and we'll be sure to answer your questions as soon as we can. With all that being said, I just want to thank you all so much for joining us today, our viewers and our wonderful Ask Experts. Thank you so much for joining us. If you like this video, go ahead, give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and we hope to see you next time on Data Exposed.
Thanks.
All right.